record. If you can go ahead and please click the button to acknowledge the recording, so that way you can stay in the meeting and just to let everyone know that it will be recorded. Once again, thanks everyone for setting aside the time to join us this evening. If you can't stay the entire time, there are 3 additional ways to keep track of the progress of the project and let us know your thoughts and comments, and also to let anyone know who may be interested in this topic but wasn't able to attend tonight's meeting. So there is a project website which is shown on the screen before you here. It's on the city webpage. So if you Googled Civic Center-Warburton parking study or you went to the city website, additional information is posted there on the project. There's also a direct phone number that you may call. It's 408-615-3043, and also an email to rrios@santaclaraca.gov. The phone number and email is to our senior civil engineer, which I'll introduce on the next slide. And so for everyone's reference, here's the agenda for tonight's meeting. We're going to go over the format of the meeting, introductions and staff, the project background and overview, an update to the project and the results of it, initial recommendations, next steps, and at the very end is questions and feedback. So first on the meeting format. First, at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to go through a staff presentation to provide information on the project. You may type questions by clicking the Q&A at any time that you'll see on the screen there. Right now, there is no chat function enabled for at this time. And what we will do is at the very end, after the presentation, we'll pause and allow as much time as possible for you to provide public comment. You can click the raise hand button at any time, and staff will call upon you to be able to unmute and speak after the presentation. So first with introductions, we have staff here from the City of Santa Clara and also with our consultant, W-Trans. I'm Jonathan Yee. I'm the Transportation Manager in the Public Works Transportation Division. Also here with us is Rafael Rios, who is the Senior Civil Engineer in the same division. And it is his contact information that you saw earlier, direct phone number and email that will connect you with him if you have any questions or additional comments after tonight, or if you would like to share information with others who are unable to be here but wanted to provide input via telephone or email. Also here with us is Chase Levasseur, our Associate Civil Engineer, also in Public Works Transportation. Michael Liu, who is our Assistant Public Works Director, and also our consultant with W-Trans is Brian Canepa, our principal there with our team. So first, we want to provide some background for anyone who may not be familiar with why we're here. So in July 2018, the Santa Clara City Council approved a 12-unit townhome project on 1900 Warburton. At that same meeting, when council approved the project, several residents appeared at the meeting to voice several concerns about parking in the area, specifically on Civic Center Drive. And as a result of that, council asked staff to create a work plan and come back at a later time to identify what could be done to address the concerns of the residents. And later in March 2019, staff brought a work plan to address the residents' concerns. And at that time, City Council approved a budget to complete a parking study. And as part of that approval, the city teamed with W-Trans, who's the consultant on this project, to complete the parking study. And that study would complete a parking analysis, identify recommendations based on that analysis, and also hold community outreach meetings. And from there, I think I'll hand it off to Brian to provide additional project background. Brian.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. So as Jonathan mentioned, there were community meetings held as part of this effort. And so the first was back in May of 2019. And the intent of that meeting was really to get input about what was going on, hear from the residents, and as Jonathan mentioned, the key issue obviously that came up during that meeting was the lack of parking at night, in particular once people are home. I apologize, I have flies buzzing around me. And while some streets were, we heard from residents that while some streets were very heavily occupied, like Civic Center, there were other streets like Lincoln that were not occupied as much. And so the result is that a lot of folks wanted to park on Civic Center or Warburton, couldn't do so, occasionally have to park either on Scott or Lincoln or other streets like that. But the net result is that some residents have to park relatively far away from their home, which is also can be a concern at night, in particular when there's concerns for safety going to their from the vehicle back to their home. There was also comments mentioned about illegally parked commercial vehicles on the street as well. Next slide. During the second meeting, so the second meeting was held about 7 months later, and at that meeting we came back both to hear from residents again if there was further input, but also to propose some ideas about ways we could potentially remedy this. And one of the items that we did discuss was the potential for diagonal parking on Civic Center Drive, and the idea about maybe converting some of the parallel spaces to diagonal spaces on Civic Center Drive, and by doing so, actually increasing the amount of parking on that street. So bringing that parking closer to residents. There had been talk about potentially doing diagonal parking on Lincoln Street, but that didn't seem to be a favored approach simply because Lincoln was so far away from where residents lived. And so during that same meeting, the same, I think, sort of issues regarding large vehicles came up. And there was also some request to look at the parking at the Triton Court Complex and the Denny's lots nearby, both to affirm I think the occupancy of the some of the nearby residences, and also see if a use something like Denny's was, are there shared parking opportunities there, particularly during evening hours. Next. And so, since December of 2019, we have gone out and recollected a lot of data at different points. So as I mentioned, we went out to Triton and Denny's in February of 2020. So this was immediately before the COVID lockdown, when things were still in relatively normal operation. Then we got a request earlier this year to collect more data at the United Methodist Church lot, which is immediately adjacent to Triton on Civic Center Drive. Folks had said, hey, there's potentially an opportunity there, maybe to share parking. The lot is particularly empty at night. And so we went out for 3 different days in May as well to collect data there. And then we also then worked with the city to come up with some conceptual designs for this diagonal parking on Civic Center Drive. What would that look like? How much could we fit? And so forth. Next. And so just to remind everyone about the area that we're covering here, it's pretty broad and covers quite a bit of parking. So we looked again at both on-street and off-street parking, and we counted everything that was, quote, countable. So we didn't necessarily enter people's garages or things of that sort, but if there was carports and things of that sort, we absolutely did. Covered everything from, Greenpoint apartments up north all the way down to El Camino Real. And in total ended up counting about 1,400 spaces in all, to get a really comprehensive look at what's really going on here in the area, both for residences on street and, as I mentioned, for places like the church lot and Denny's. And we went and did counts each time on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, both during the midday and overnight. We wanted to confirm that there wasn't anything strange going on midday. Normally in residential neighborhoods, the peak demand occurs overnight, and that was certainly the case here. But we wanted to get a chance to do counts during the midday as well to confirm there wasn't anything unusual. So we ended up doing, we got quite a few data points from that. Next. And so, as I discussed here, we went out and did counts during the midday, and hopefully everyone can see the legend in the lower right-hand corner here that highlights the parking availability. So what these maps are showing you is that green indicates there was a lot of parking available at that time. Red means there was very little parking available. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of green on this chart here. So, which is not surprising during midday. A lot of people are at work or out doing things. But there was actually still a fair number of cars that were parked, as you can see by the yellow, on Civic Center Drive in Warburton and on Lincoln. Lincoln actually had a greater occupancy, again, not surprising considering the city offices are right across the street from it. And so people are frequenting those uses during the day. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb for parking management, what we like to target at the end of the day is a 15% availability on a block. At that point, we know that the block is being well used, but there's still enough availability for someone to come and park in a space if they need to. We don't shoot normally for 100% usage of each block, because if someone new comes and tries to park, they won't be able to find a space and they'll have to circle around. So that 15% availability is kind of the sweet spot that we aim for. But, as you can see here, the on-street spaces, even during the daytime, are a little bit more heavily utilized than the off-street spaces. Next slide. Okay, so the situation changes drastically at night, which is something that we heard from everyone, and when we suspected, very common in residential neighborhoods, is that, as you can see over on Don Ave, on Warburton, on Civic Center, these are all full, essentially, going out at night. And, again, that's exactly what people had said. We also had seen that on Lincoln Scott, there was quite a bit of availability, right? Because most people are less prone to want to park further away and walk to their homes. Even the residences themselves were actually relatively well utilized. So if you see Greenpoint Apartments, there was about 16% availability. Down in Triton, it was 0. Which indicates that at least in some, if not most, of the residential complexes there that we're able to count, that people are indeed using their spaces where they can. And I note that because that's not always the case. Sometimes we do counts and we find that residents not using their garages are parking on street. And that always occurs to some degree, but here it actually looks like there's pretty good usage of residential parking. Next slide. And lastly, this is kind of a macro look at occupancy. As you can see, there's 3 bars here. The first shows off-street parking, that's a private parking. The middle bar is on-street public parking, and the last bar is the total parking for the area. And as you would expect, and as we've discussed, the on-street parking is more heavily utilized. And you could say, well, gosh, there's 23% of the spaces, almost a quarter of the spaces are open at peak hour on street. How is that possible? Well, that's Lincoln and Scott. These are the less convenient spaces that are open. So these sorts of analyses are useful because it tells us things like saying that, yes, on-street parking is definitely more heavily in demand than off-street parking, which again is very common. But we look obviously at maps and block faces and things like that because it can't tell us exactly where that demand is peaking. This bar chart won't tell us, that certain streets are higher than others, but we know that to be true. So definitely something that we wanted to take into account when we developed our recommendations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jonathan.
Great, thanks, Brian. I do see a few more people who joined us before we had started. So just for everyone's reference, right now we're talking about the Civic Center-Warburton parking study. It was initiated by council back in June 2018. We've just presented some background information and some initial findings and results. At this point, we're in the recommendations part of the presentation. We have a few more slides, and then after that, we're actually going to open it up to the public. So right now, as you log into Zoom, you may just see a raise hand button and a Q&A button. So right now, there's no chat feature enabled at this moment in time. But after we finish this PowerPoint, which is a few more slides, we will open it up for the public where you can click the raise hand button, and we'll provide some additional instructions later. And we can always go back to other slides if there's questions that come up. So right now, as Brian had mentioned, generally what we saw was as part of the study, we counted 1,400 parking spaces, nearly every single parking lot and every single street, generally east of Scott on Warburton, Don and Civic Center, and on Lincoln. And based on those findings, what we found was that it was generally um, readily available during a weekday noon period, and fairly full on a weekday night period. Um, and that led us to some initial recommendations. So the first recommendation was uh, to report issues for enforcement. So if residents see vehicles blocking driveways or parking longer than 72 hours, our police department can enforce those rules. On the slide before you, there's a website that'll provide a direct link to our police department's uh, public request system, and the police department staff will directly receive those and react accordingly. You can also use the My Santa Clara app. So if you have a smartphone, you can download an app through your app store called My Santa Clara and submit parking issues via that method. Um, but what we did want to talk about and the focus of the meeting was a potential solution to the findings that we saw on the street. And so staff took a more detailed look. There is a diagonal parking concept that we recommend on Civic Center Drive. Um, if this parking concept were to go in, the diagonal parking would add 25 new parking spaces. So currently, we estimate there's about 91 spaces on street on Civic Center Drive. So this is the entire length south of Warburton and just east of Lincoln. So right now there's about 91 spaces. Based on this concept, 25 spaces would be added. So that would add a result in 116 total spaces. As part of the concept, the recommendation would be to slurry seal the roadway because there's lots of parking T's and markings there. This would provide a good clean surface, and then we would mark those diagonal spaces. And I just wanted to note that as of right now, this is currently unfunded. So we had mentioned that back in March 2019, when council approved this project, council approved a budget to complete only a parking study. And this third meeting here is to finalize the results and recommendations of that specific study. Sorry here. And so on this next slide, this shows the concept of the diagonal parking um, on Civic Center Drive. Based on the existing roadway width, we found that we could fit diagonal parking on one side of the street. And so if you're looking at this diagram, north is pointing to the left. So the street going up from top to bottom on the left side, that's Warburton Avenue. The street going from left to right on the top of the screen, that's Lincoln. And Civic Center is the street on the bottom and to the right there. So starting at the lower left corner at Warburton and Civic Center, you'll notice that there's diagonal parking on the west side of the street. And as I mentioned, the roadway width accommodates diagonal parking only on one side. And staff initially recommends this side of the street because it has less driveways than on the east side. So when there's less driveways, there's less gaps and there's more opportunities to provide parking spaces. Um, as you're going towards the right, lower right side of the screen, you see that the street bends around the corner and heads on the north side of Denny's. And from there, our initial recommendation is to put the diagonal parking on the north side of the street. Once again, this is also because of the number of driveways and to maximize the supply. And so on the screen before you is our initial recommendation for this diagonal parking concept. As I mentioned before, this potential concept would add 25 new spaces. So starting right now, the existing is 91, as I had mentioned. So adding 25 spaces, that's increasing the parking supply by about 25 to 28% of the existing supply. And so on this final slide, before we open it up for public comment, is the next steps for the project. So we're here today at the third community meeting. Our goal here was to present the findings and the initial recommendations, specifically to get some community feedback on the diagonal parking concept. Once we do that, our next steps is to summarize all the feedback received from these three meetings, finalize the costs for the potential diagonal parking, if that is supported by everyone here, and hopefully appear before council at the end of 2021 in December to present the results of the parking study to council and request approval of the diagonal parking and of the funding needed to complete the design and hopefully construct and implement that diagonal parking. And that concludes the staff presentation portion of the meeting. Right now, we'd like to open it up to get questions and feedback from anyone in the audience that wishes to speak. You may do so by clicking the raise hand icon on the screen before you on that bar there, or if you've called in, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and our staff will proceed to announce your name to allow you to speak, and you can unmute yourself. So Chase, I see one hand raised so far.
I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Morteza, I'd like to speak.
Thank you. My name is Morteza. You pronounce it right, and I'm the president of Civic Center HOA. So first of all, thanks, Brian, to share the study with us. I have a general comment about the quality of life as the time goes by in our neighborhood in general, and also some questions about the study. So as a homeowner, when I moved here 15, 16 years ago, we liked the area, the quality of the life, the openness of the area. It's a good place to raise a family. But as you have seen, and as other neighbors are aware, in the past couple of years, within a couple of blocks of Civic Center, there has been at least 6 or 7 high-density development that has been developed. These are higher density. These are not single-family houses. These are condominium. They all have challenges with the parking, the density. So in the general comment is that the density of this area is increasing, and at the cost of the quality of the life of the people who decided to make Santa Clara their home. Going back to the slides that I believe Brian mentioned, presented, Brian, I noticed that next to the church, you highlighted that parking as green. My understanding is that parking is a private parking. So this should not be counted as available parking for other residents. It's only for the people who go to the church. So is my understanding, are you counting that parking lot as available parking for anybody to park at any time?
No, we had counted the lot, and Jonathan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've been asked to count the lot in case there was any possibility to try to quote share that space. But right now you are correct. Our knowledge is private and not necessarily publicly available or accessible parking. Yeah.
So I think we should cross it out because it gives the impression that that is available parking, which is not accurate. My other question was that, so all these developers, they develop these high density building, they cause problem with the other neighbors, and then it's up to us to come up with a solution. So for example, for this 1900 Warburton, why not the developer develop underground parking for their development so it doesn't introduce parking problem? The other question is that next to the church, I believe is at 1600 Civic Center Drive, there's going to be another ultra high density development. So as you guys did your assessment and study, are you taking into the consideration the additional traffic and the parking issue that this upcoming development is going to introduce for the neighborhood? So 2 questions, why not the developer of 1900 Warburton? add underground parking so the neighbors don't have to pay the price for additional congestion, and introducing these proposed to do diagonal parking, which I'm against of it personally.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thank you, Morteza, for the question. So I think your first question was about the project that was kind of already approved and kicked off this specific project here before us about 1900 Warburton. Um, I can't specifically address the question of why the parking wasn't placed underground. But if I recall, when the project was presented to council, that project that it did meet the code required parking at that time when it was approved by council. So I think that's all I can provide on the information there in terms of why that parking wasn't specifically underground or why more parking was provided beyond the city code requirement. I can't really comment on that, but I believe those issues were brought up to council at that meeting when the project was approved, and I believe council felt that wasn't required for the project since it was approved without it. And I think your second question was about the future development at 1600 Civic Center. So very similar to 1900 Warburton. Typically, when a project application is received for development, um, uh, we work with community development department to look and make sure that the parking supply or the proposed parking that it does meet the code requirement within our city code. So that way, that code is specifying that the on-site parking should be sufficient for that land use. Um, I would say that right now on the map before you, and as Brian had mentioned, our team went out there, out in the field and specifically counted vehicles parked at two representative times of the day. Um, we didn't do another step to look at, say, uh, that we forecast what developments may or may not be approved in the next 5 years, and then therefore estimated who could be parking in the street, and then add that into the map before you. So these colors represent purely what's out there today. We didn't do a specific forecast based on what land uses may or may not be approved in the future. But I think that goes to your very first comment about specific parking lots being identified, and how you mentioned how the church parking lot is not specifically open to the public, and therefore you stated that it was misleading to show that as green. However, one reason we wanted to count every single parking lot around the streets was to provide a comprehensive picture to council when we do present these findings. Um, because what we did here at prior meetings was that parking was so difficult on the street that it was potentially spilling over to these other parking lots, which may not specifically be open to the public, but that people were parking there because they couldn't find anywhere to park on the street. And so that's why, as part of this project, we specifically counted that church lot. We specifically counted the Triton Museum, and we also counted the Denny's lot because those were areas that residents had told us in past meetings that people were potentially parking there. So we did want to count the people parking there just to capture that and provide a complete picture to council.
Thank you, but again, all these meetings that we attend and all the feedback that we provide, it is a common trend that nothing comes out of it. And again, going back to my original comment about the quality of life in this area is going down, and looks like the homeowners in this area, the people who moved here, pretty much have no say in it, because we go to all these meetings and never ever anything comes out of it for the benefit of the homeowners. Whoever is the developer is going to get to do whatever they want to, and then we have to pay the price for it.
I see.
Hey, Jonathan, can I just
Sure.
add a few things?
Sure.
So just wanted to make sure everybody introduce myself again. My name is Mike Liu. I'm Assistant Director here in Public Works. Yeah, I was involved in the study going back to the early days in 2018 and then scoping it and then, attending meetings and whatnot. So I wanted to really provide a little bit more context to what Jonathan was saying with regards to the fact that we counted those other lots, being the Denny's lot, the Triton, as well as the church parking lot. So, I think when it comes to this graphic, we can certainly change this graphic to basically, because if this graphic for those looking at it, really look at it as an inventory map in terms of what's like public, what's available for the residents, then yes, I believe we should probably take that out. We did count it though at the request of some of the residents. So at the last meeting I was at, which is the second meeting, there was comment from a couple residents that, because we had presented these results earlier, right? All the red on the public street, we had presented that back at the second meeting. And there were comments coming from the residents with regards to these other lots. And they were basically telling us that, hey, we know of some people that park in those lots. And, we didn't want the fact that they parked in those lots and the fact that you didn't count them make the numbers look less severe on the public streets. So that was one thing that kind of resonated with us. So we took it upon ourselves to do a second and third phase of counting just to get some information. So when we go back to council, we can present all the information that's coming from the study, which is going to include community feedback. So Morteza, your comments with regards to quality of life, density, as well as parking requirements, those will all be included in our report to council. When we go to council, we'll make sure that everybody on this call will get a notice when we're ready to bring it to council, and then you can certainly attend that meeting and voice your concerns as you have today. I don't want you to feel like this is your last venue, because it's not. Our council will listen, and at the end of the day, they'll give staff direction. We'll also make sure our planning staff can attend to address the concerns you have regarding parking for new developments, in the future. I think it's a very valid point you bring up, and it's something that a lot of cities are dealing with in terms of the higher density developments really being kind of the wave of what we see in terms of building residential stock in the long term. So I just wanted to mention those things because I think we didn't want them to be left unsaid, that your voices are important, and we did want to thank you for coming today. Morteza, I think there was one comment that I thought I heard you make regarding the diagonal that you didn't like that. So if that's correct, could you provide us a little more feedback in terms of why you don't like the diagonal parking? Or so that way we can understand that a little bit more, because diagonal parking is not something you normally see in residential neighborhoods, but in this case it was something that staff thought might make some sense in relative to some of the issues that were presented with the study.
Yeah, I think these diagonal parking, first of all, from the safety point of view, there are a lot of kids on the street. Sometimes people walk away. So these diagonal parking make it harder for the driver to see people are walking into the street. The other one is it is taking away from the available width of the street. So it is making the road narrower. So these are the two reasons. And again,
Okay.
It goes back to the fact that we are jamming more and more houses, people parking into a fixed area, which was not designed for this. I don't think when many years ago, Santa Clara granted permit for the housing around here, the idea was that all these buildings, we're gonna replace them with high density condominiums. I don't think that was the plan, but right now looks like we are moving that way at the cost of just increasing the density on all fronts. So that.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I understood your comments regarding not liking the diagonal, right? And hopefully I'm not using the word incorrectly, but
yeah,
thank you for that.
maybe I should have used it better.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I think, the team has presented the information. I think one of the things we're going to talk about internally is, you know, we don't know if everybody that wanted to be here can be here. So, I think Jonathan mentioned earlier that if you could share this information or share some of the information, with your neighbors. Obviously, if you're a president of HOA, Morteza, you can share with your HOA. There is a website, as Jonathan mentioned. We're probably going to, I think one of the things we'll talk about is whether we kind of leave things open for a little bit in terms of this presentation. We wanted to make sure we got out to the community and showed you guys that graphic, right? Because that was really what we thought was an immediate fix that could provide some relief. But we do want to make sure we get everybody's comment, that they have the time to look at it. So the intent of the website is to get people more information so they can digest everything, and then soon enough we will bring it to our council for some discussion with them. So I think for Jonathan, for this meeting today, people got a mailed notice. Is that correct?
Correct. There was we mailed out a flyer.
There was a flyer, and there was also social media.
Correct.
Okay. So if I could ask the folks on the call, how did you hear about this meeting? Was it the flyer? Was it social media? I'm just curious how the outreach works for you guys. So, like, what's the best way to reach people? Actually, it looks like there's some more questions. So actually, before we get into, okay, so somebody's saying flyer, and then others are saying flyer. Okay, great. And then it looks like Jonathan's going to try to answer some of these questions. So I don't know if you want to go through these, Jonathan, so that way people can just see the responses. So it looks like there's Jennifer had 2 questions.
Sure. Yeah, I can read. I think one was just a comment from Jennifer about agreeing with what was said earlier about the quality of life being impacted due to increased development and higher density, which would essentially strain resources, including the limited parking supply and increased traffic. A question from Jennifer was, why wasn't an in-depth parking study done before the townhouse development was approved? And so I can answer that. I believe, as I mentioned earlier, is that when new developments are proposed within areas, city staff works with community development to look at the parking supply or the number of parking spaces being provided on site. And what we do is we compare those number of spaces to our city code, because our city code does require the minimum amount of parking provided for a given land use. And so for that specific townhouse development, if I recall correctly, the number of spaces on site, it did meet the minimum requirement of the code, and that information was presented to our council, and council accepted that information when they ultimately approved the project. This is the project on 1900 Warburton. And so here we're still at the moment in the meeting where if anyone else wishes to speak, you can click the raise hand button, or continue typing comments or questions in that Q&A button that you see before you, if desired. And what I can do as we wait, I can this is just the last slide of the presentation. As we wait, we're still on the meeting. If you would like to speak or type in more comments and questions, but here's that information presented earlier for those who may not have seen it. There are several ways to provide additional comment and questions, and just to share information with others who may not have been able to attend tonight's meeting. There is a website. So if you Googled City of Santa Clara, that would take you to the city website. And if once in that website, if you typed in Civic Center parking, it would likely bring you to a link which would bring you to the page shown at the website link on the screen right now. There's also a direct phone number and email to to our senior civil engineer Rafael Rios. That phone number is on the screen before you. If you wanted to call someone directly to have a specific question or comment, or even email that, uh, those are other methods to get in touch with us.
You know, if I can just add that if you're a part of this meeting today, if you could kindly email us, email Raphael your contact information. You know, if you just want to have your name and your email, so that way we can get a note to you when we do bring it to council. We'll be updating the website with that information, but you know, since you're here, I wanted to make sure that you heard that directly today, that you know, we do want to make sure that you know you have the opportunity if you want to attend the council meeting and hear what they have to say, and then you know talk during public comment if desired. So. So yeah, there's one more comment from Jennifer, Jonathan, that popped up here.
Let me see. Oh, I see. So yeah, so there's two more comments. Just one about you know, there's talk. There were prior comments about quality of life and how higher density is impacting the available resources, such as the parking supply and the you know, amount of space that could impact the traffic. This comment was just specifically about how quality of life could also be impacted by not providing enough housing for those who need it. Um, so that was just one comment we had. And then another comment was also from Jennifer, just stating that in a one-bedroom unit there could be 3 or 4 adults living there, and so therefore the answer about the city code providing a certain number of parking spaces based on the number of bedroom units, that could potentially be needing an update because of the number of adults living in a certain size or bedroom unit. So I think from there, we're still available. As I mentioned, this was the last slide. So we will be, as Mike mentioned, we will be posting this presentation on that web page, so you can look at it as you please. That same web page also has the prior presentations from the past 2 community meetings, as well as other information. Um, as Michael had mentioned, um, this is the next steps for the project. And so as we get closer to that council date, staff would likely be sending out additional flyers or notices to the same general area, just to present an update to anyone that lived in the area about when that potential council date could be. So if you're available, you could also attend that same meeting to voice your opinions and concerns for the area.
Yeah, and I'll add one last thing is I would encourage you to, you know, when you get the time, take a look at the website. There's a lot of good information on there, some history, copies of the maps, and just information that I think is helpful. And then you can actually see the conceptual parking diagram, which, you know, I think is, you know, worth looking at since you live in the area. And then of course share it with your neighbors. You know, at the end of the day, this stuff is for the residents. You know, for those that live in the area. So we do want to get comment and feedback from people. And if you like it, that's great. And if you don't like it and there's something that you have a concern about, we'd like to hear about it. You know, potentially obviously prior to implementing something, right? And you know, and then one last comment is that, you know, at this point we will go to council, we'll present the information, and as mentioned earlier, there's currently no funding. So, you know, council may accept it and grant funding, or they may, you know, not grant the funding. They may send us in a different direction. You know, it's really hard to tell at this point, but we, you know, staff is going to have information for them to digest, as similar to what you've seen today. Looks like we have another question, Jonathan.
Let's see here. I see there's a question about increased parking control. So there's two comments. One was about moving containers sitting there since June across from the executive house. Staff did receive complaints about that, so we are working to provide notices to the person who did apply for that permit that the containers are there sitting longer than the approved permit time. So staff is aware and working on that. There was another comment about potentially people living in their vehicles. And so right now, this past city council meeting, um, staff and the police department did do a study session with the city council on a strategy on addressing individuals potentially living in their vehicles and occupying parking spaces. So that is being worked on a long-term strategy. Right now, when the complaints or requests are submitted, staff does work with the police department, and the police staff does go out there to potentially offer or potentially provide information to those individuals if they need any services, and also to enforce our code. Our code does have a 72-hour parking limit, and so the police can enforce the available codes and regulations that are in place right now. Now that we see this comment, um, we will notify the police department to enforce and take a look at the Civic Center area to potentially investigate individuals living in their vehicles.
Yeah, and as Jonathan mentioned, you know, there was a study session by the council, the city council, at its last meeting, and it was really about the unhoused and how, you know, the city of Santa Clara is trying to deal with that, whether it's, you know, providing services or dealing with, you know, some of the byproducts of people living in vehicles, large vehicles, whether it be trash and other things. And there was a pretty good discussion regarding, you know, the rules and regulations by which the city can operate with those with regards to those situations. So if you're curious about that in terms of what, you know, limitations the city has, you know, you feel free to take a look at that study session. It was very informative from the perspective of, can the city, um, you know, tell people they can't live in their cars. I think there's some, I think with the pandemic that caused some change in how cities were operating, but on top of that, there's just some rules and regulations and case law that really push us and push the police department in a certain direction, at least for the time being. So, but as Jonathan mentioned, we will certainly mention that area to police so they can investigate further. So.
I see an additional question about the trucks being parked for a long time on El Camino. Um, yeah, we've seen that as well, specifically right around the intersection of Lincoln and El Camino. And we're also working with our police department to enforce the potential 72-hour rules there as well. So thank you for that comment. Yeah, so at this moment, everyone, we're 5 minutes before 7 o'clock. As I mentioned, we've already concluded the formal presentation. At this moment, it's just question and answer, or if you want to type in comments or raise your hand to speak. But you're free to either stay or leave if desired. But I think we'll hang around until 7 o'clock, and then we'll likely formally end the meeting there. Um, and definitely check out the website, or you can give us a call or email if desired. Thank you. I did want to acknowledge an additional comment that came in about the concern of placing diagonal parking on Civic Center because of the observation that Civic Center is used to get from between El Camino and Warburton, and typically they're driving at speeds higher than 25 miles an hour. So thank you for that comment. We'll definitely uh, present all that in our report to council. Another comment came in from Jennifer about parking vehicles parked on corners that make it difficult to turn left onto Warburton. So thank you for that comment. What we can do is we can take a look at that intersection to confirm what we can do about improving the visibility, so it's easier to turn left onto Warburton. Okay, everyone. So right now it's 7 o'clock. I think we've given about 15 minutes for an open forum for everyone to either have the opportunity to raise their hand and speak, or typing in comments and questions in the Q&A. So thank you everyone for providing your input tonight. As up on the screen before you, once again, if you would like to follow up or share this information with any of your neighbors, we have a website, and you can call that number or email us, so one of our staff members can directly either speak with you or address one of your comments or concerns. It could be either about the project specifically or just anything else you see in the area. So once again, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your evening to be with us, and hope everyone has a good night. So thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for attending. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.